Okay, I think we can start now. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the National and International Policy Session. First of all, thank you all for joining virtually here today. I know we all rather be meeting in person and doing the conference a normal way, but what I'd like to assure you as a moderator is that whatever we may lose in terms of the interpersonal things that we may have gained, we will make up in terms of the content that we have. And to prove we have more than, we have in 90 minutes, we have about 7 speakers who will be talking on a range of topics, including policies to reaching out 100% renewable energy, the role of federal government, and a success story from Bangladesh. And since this is the first time we're doing it virtually, and we're very afraid of the technical issues that might happen, the presenters have generally pre-recorded their presentation before, and maybe who's the co-moderator with me, she'll be playing the videos. And after the video ends, we will ask the moderator a question. So if you have any questions while the video, please type them out and send it to us while the video is being played. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Achyut Perez. He's joining us live and also available to the question afterwards, like I mentioned. Richard joins us from University of Albany, where he leads the university's research in solar energy. He has extensive experience in solar and has been involved as a board member on the Georgia-Washington University solar industry, and also has been involved in ACES for many years. He has published more than 250 different papers on solar topics. Today, he will be presenting on how we can reach 100% renewable energy. Evie, would you like to play the video, please? Thank you.
Yes.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for attending this policy session. I would like to introduce my co-authors, Mark Perez from Clean Power Research, and my colleagues from Pace University, University of Rome, and URAC. The title of the presentation is A Blueprint for Achieving 100% Renewable Energy. And the subtitle I borrowed from a panel I was on a couple months ago. What steps are government taking to allow integration of renewables into the power supply? And when I was on that panel, the first thing I did was to change the wording a bit, because the current steps are probably not optimal in my opinion. So let's look at the big picture. Solar and wind in green at the top are the 2 largest resources that could supply the Earth many times over the consumption and replace the finite resources. So we have a big solution potential. And for solar, the instrument of that solution is PV, and PV is getting a lot cheaper. It's probably the cheapest way to make electricity today. And this is the price of modules from 1987 when I started working, and it's not going back up. It's in the 20s per watt today, and it's going to be in the 10s per watt in a year or two, according to my friends in the industry. So we have a big solution. It's a very cheap solution, but it's not growing as fast and as smartly as it could. And there are 2 reasons for that, in my opinion. One is intermittency, and the other one is regulation. And they kind of don't go well together. The regulations don't deal well with intermittency today and cannot grow solar where it could be. So let's look at intermittency first. That's the output of a plant on a partly cloudy day. And that's what's needed on the grid. So obviously it doesn't fit. And as a result, solar has a marginal position, when what we need at the end of the day is a grid dominant position. And that marginal intermittent position, in my opinion, is at the root of the utility solar industry opposition we see today and all these assaults on, say, net metering. And that's the intraday issue with its well-known ducks growing on power curves. But that's a small problem. The much bigger problem, order of magnitude at least bigger, is the multi-day and seasonal intermittency. What we need is something that's capable of producing 24 hours a day, 365 days a year without failing, if we are serious about replacing conventional regeneration into solar and maybe wind. So how do you transform intermittent PV into firm dispatchable 24/7? Storage can do the job, and everybody's looking at it. There is one issue with that, whereas intermittent PV is very cheap, below grid parity. Firming it up 24/7 with storage alone would be hopelessly expensive. And even considering the lease cost projection of future or storage costs, that would still be way, way too expensive. Unless we do something that's contrarian, we overbuild PV and wind and we curtail them by design. We waste some of the output. And when you do that, and that was the major finding in Mark's PhD a few years ago at Columbia, the firm cost of energy that you see, the white line, goes down, and it reached a point where it can be almost acceptable, near grid parity today. And you can see the contribution of PV in red and storage in blue. So PV goes up because you overbuild, but storage goes way, way down. It's so effective, in fact, that we started calling that implicit storage. We can back that up with high visibility studies we completed. We adjusted for MISO, the Mid-Atlantic System Operator, where solutions for 2040 point dominance of PV and wind at less than 5 cents per kilowatt hour. That's for 24/7 power. We looked at several islands where we also reached low level for 100% PV. And my colleagues in Italy did the Italian grid where they arrived at very similar conclusions. So technically it can be done. The thing is that the solution to get us there doesn't work today. It's not monetizable. So we are stuck here in a marginal position, an expensive position, where we could get there in a low cost and effective position capable of replacing everything. So the solution obviously is not dependent on technology, but on policy. And the first thing that ought to be done is to considering monetizing firm kilowatt hour instead of unconstrained as we have today. That means embed the storage, curtailment, and geographic dispersion that can enable that firmness into the monetization. Firm PPAs along the lines could do that. And at the same time, we would have to move away from things that remunerate all the kilowatt hours and maximize production as we have today. Things net metering as we know it, current PPAs. In New York, we have VDER, value of distributed energy resource. They're all geared on maximizing, on counting all the kilowatt hours. So we have to move away from that. Second thing is to recognize that we need firm power with respect to the grid and not to any particular user. So we have to evolve from a process today which is largely customer driven to bring the utilities and grid operators into the picture, especially as far as management is concerned. That doesn't preclude developer and customer ownership by any means. And that customer-driven to grid operator-driven process is something I lived through myself over the years. When we built our first PV system before it was even legal to interconnect in 1995, I had no idea what marginal solar was back then. I wanted to use my roof and produce my own energy. A few years ago, we graduated to a much bigger system. We have a battery, we can do arbitraging, we can be resilient, we have electric transportation, and we can brag about being net zero. And the system makes it really easy for us. We have net metering, high value, we have tax credits from New York and the feds, rebates from New York, rebates for the EVs, and everything else could be financed at very low interest. But the question to ask, is that the best way to big solar? And the answer I must give is a resounding no, a big no. Because none of those million customers you see here can do what we did. They don't have either the financial means or the space to do that, nor can these large industrial customers. And if I solve our problem, it's a small part of what we have to do. So we have solar at the margin for some today, when we could have big solar for all. So it's not quite there yet. So how do we evolve from marginal to big solar? So first, we have to monetize firm power, because at the end of the day, we'll need firmness from solar and wind. That means embed the enablers, storage and overbuilding in the monetization. Second is to bring in the grid operator in the loop, especially as far as managing the production. And since we are talking about overbuilding PV, it's important to ask how much space we would need at the end of the day if we're going to double the space. In the US, it would be 8,500 square miles of PV, assuming twice oversizing. And I've been spending an awful lot of time lately to debunk a growing grassroots opposition opposed to PV development in the countryside. But when you put those 8,500 square miles in perspective, it's not much at all. It's a tiny fraction of the way we occupy the ground in the US. It's about the size of high-density urban development, half of the size of medium-density urban development, and about 1% of farmland. And we're using 7 times more to produce corn ethanol today. It's mind-boggling. And we're not even sure it has a positive energy return. Another thing where we don't ask about space is hydropower. We're using twice as much with flooded ecosystems to produce only of the US electricity. So think about it, producing 100% with half the space, 24/7, not bad. So the third thing we need government help with is local, state, regional planning to see where we would deploy. So we have a big solution. We have a cheap solution that can work effectively, demonstratively well, but it's in dire waiting of effective new policy and regulatory thinking to enable that potential. So this is the view of the world today. It's the same energy, but distorted. That's the view that the conventional players would like you to have. But it's also a view we contribute to by sticking to a marginal position for solar. So we have to evolve from that. And on those good words, I'll thank you for it. And be ready to take any question.
Hi, Richard. Thank you so much. That's an excellent presentation with excellent graphics. So you mentioned firm power as being energy that's available 24/7, 365 days. So the biggest question is, so what are you going to do at night? So if I was a solar developer and if I'm looking at a PPA, like a request for energy for 365 days, 24/7, how would I respond to that? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So if we change the PPA from the today's PPA, where you just price in energy produced by PV, to something that must be available 24/7 a day, you will have to optimize your PV plus something else to make it available 24/7. That includes storage and oversizing. Oversizing being by far the most effective solution of both, but you need both.
Thanks, Richard. So for our second, for in context of time, we're just going to move on. And for our second speaker today is Larry Sherwood. Larry is the president and CEO of IREC, stands for Interstate Renewable Energy Council, and he has over more than 40 years of experience in renewable energy. He's previously worked as an administrator of the Solar Board for Codes and Standards, and also served as an executive director of Small Wind Certification Council. He joins us from his solar-powered house in Colorado, and in his presentation, he will discuss the value and contribution of DERs and policy changes required for 100% renewable energy. Margaret, would you please play Larry's video?
Hi, my name is Larry Sherwood from the Interstate Renewable Energy Council. When you hear the term 100% clean energy, what is your next thought? All electricity is clean? Your energy use nets to 100% clean energy? Or all energy used in the United States is 100% clean energy? I define 100% clean energy as 100% of the US energy use is clean. In order to get to 100% clean energy, we need 100% clean renewable energy. We need to electrify transportation, buildings, and other energy uses that rely on fossil fuel today. We need massive energy efficiency so we use less energy. And we need grid flexibility. I'll discuss a little more about grid flexibility later in this presentation. These are the elements we need to have 100% clean energy. Today, most of America's energy comes from fossil fuels. Only 11% of all energy in 2019 came from clean, renewable energy sources. 18% of electricity production came from renewables. We are a long way from 100% clean energy today. Across the country, states, cities, corporations, and even utilities are setting goals of 100% clean energy. 8 states, plus Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico, those in green and blue on this map, have set 100% or clean energy targets, either through mandatory requirements or goals. Other states are considering such requirements. Over 100 cities and towns have committed to transition to 100% clean energy. Over 200 corporations have committed to 100% clean energy. 6 utilities have set 100% clean or carbon-free targets. Some of these are goals, some are legal mandates, and some fall somewhere between these two boundaries. These states, cities, companies, and utilities are looking to reduce the impacts of climate change. They also seek the economic benefits and jobs that come with clean energy installations. As I mentioned at the beginning, grid flexibility is required to get to 100% clean energy goals. A flexible grid is created at the distribution end of the electric grid and requires the following elements. It requires distributed renewables. It requires storage to make the renewables available more hours during the day. It requires energy efficiency because reduced loads are easier to manage. And as we electrify transportation, buildings, and other end uses, we need to manage those loads so they add to the reliability and the resilience of the electric system and not detract from reliability. And finally, we need to manage customer loads so they complement the production in the larger electric system. With these items, we create grid flexibility. Let's now look at some examples of 100% clean energy goals. California is one of the states with the 100% clean energy goal. Let's unpack this goal and dig deeper. California's goal applies to electricity sales. This means that electricity that a consumer purchases from the electric company must be 100% carbon-free by 2045. But if a customer generates and uses their own electricity from solar, that production does not count toward the 100% goal. Also, large amounts of the transportation and building sectors are powered by fossil fuel today. This goal does not affect those sectors unless they convert to electricity. California's 100% clean energy goal is good, but this goal does not mean that 100% of California's energy will come from clean energy. Many companies have committed to 100% clean energy. Apple announced in 2018 that all of its facilities worldwide are powered by 100% clean energy. Apple has built many renewable energy projects and also purchases renewable energy certificates. But when Apple or most corporations say they are powered by 100% clean energy, they mean that they buy enough clean energy to offset their energy consumption. At some times, Apple generates more clean energy than it needs, and at other times, Apple uses electricity that is generated from fossil fuels. Apple's net use is 100% clean. But if every consumer had net energy use that was clean, that would not mean that 100% clean energy was generated for the entire economy. Fossil fuel use is still required at some times. Corporate 100% clean energy goals are great, and many companies are building and purchasing increasing amounts of clean energy. But for a whole state or country, clean energy, that energy must be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That is a challenging task. Researchers at Stanford University have studied what the energy resources will be in a 100% clean energy future. They project that wind will generate 38% of the energy, large-scale solar 31%, rooftop solar 26%, and other renewable sources 4%. And because 100% clean energy future requires electrification of transportation and buildings, we must implement massive energy efficiency to reach these goals. Wind farms and large solar arrays are utility scale renewables. Their electricity goes into the wires of the electric system and is distributed to consumers. Distributed solar is solar located at or near consumer sites. For example, solar panels on homes, stores, and commercial buildings. It supplies electricity directly to the customer. This electricity is one of the components of the flexible grid, which, as we have seen, is required to get to 100% clean energy. In many parts of the country today, you will see many installations of rooftop solar. But these rooftop solar installations produce less than 1% of the United States' total electricity production. That is the small yellow sliver in this pie chart. This is a small part of the 25% we need to get from distributed energy resources in a 100% clean energy future. Now what? What do we need to reach 100% clean energy? Remember the elements of 100% clean energy future. We need 100% clean, renewable electricity. We need to electrify transportation, buildings, and other energy uses that rely on fossil fuels today. We need massive energy efficiency, so we use less energy, and we need grid flexibility. All of these elements are required to get to the 100% clean energy future. Thank you very much for your attention today, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might.
Larry, I love your presentation, especially in context with what Richard was talking about, because it seems like you are talking more in terms of demand, like on the demand side with grid flexibility and with able to load shift. And and Richard was talking on the supply side with trying to increase the supply. Would you agree with that assessment? And do you have any thoughts on Richard's presentation? And maybe after that, maybe Richard, I could pull you in and maybe your thoughts on on Larry's presentation.
I think that the management of the grid of the future, if it's 100% or some very high percentage renewable, is going to require management both behind the meter and good management of the large renewable sources on the utility side of the meter. And those two areas are going to have to work well together. So the way that you're going to manage the system behind the grid is in the way to complement what is being produced in front of the grid. So both are needed, and careful management of the overall system is what's going to be required to make it work.
Thanks, Larry. And Richard, what are your thoughts on Larry's presentation? When you research, did you look at demand flexibility as some of the options?
We were demand agnostic. The only requirement that we had was to meet the load 100% of the time. And we not only looked at electrical load, but we also looked at electrified sectors, buildings, and transportation as well. And in all situations, we arrived at very low cost solar energy. So for me, demand and supply are two things. You don't need to look at them together. I think you can solve the supply problem by itself. If you work with demand as well, all the better. But supply can be done very cheaply. It can be 100% solar or majority solar wind. I don't think there are any problems to realize that. And as we see it, it wouldn't take over paving the US to do that. You can do it with very little surface.
Okay. Thanks, Richard. So Larry, I also want to pull you in again. And as you're aware, there's currently a petition before FERC by a group called NERA asking for changes in net metering policy. And with your work in IREC, and essentially your group has been the main player in promoting net metering and interconnection policies over the last 10, 15 years. How would this petition, if approved, would change net metering, and how would it affect you as a net metering customer?
So net metering is an economic proposition. It's a proposition where the electricity that you generate, you exchange or sell back to the utility at the same price as the electricity that you buy from the utility. So that is the economic proposition that has been sold to most people who have solar today behind the meter. So the changing that proposition will change the economics for customers. Whether it changes the proposition for existing customers or whether they're grandfathered in or just for new customers is a question that's not answered, and we don't know what that will be. I will say that in general, there has been a move away from net metering or from less generous net metering policies around the country, and customers and companies are responding to that with new models, maybe solar plus storage type models, other types of things. And because, as Richard said, solar is pretty cheap, those models can still work. I think with any policy change, it's always best if the policy change is gradual so the marketplace can respond to it. When you have really fast changes, it tends to disrupt the market and cause problems in the short term.
Okay. Thanks, Larry. Certainly very interesting topic, and we might revisit if there's time later on. But let's move on to our third speaker, who is Sandy Thomas. And Sandy is a very well-known figure in hydrogen industry. Dr. Thomas started working in hydrogen economy, hydrogen base, starting in 2001 with creating his own company. And he has published a number of books and research publications on clean hydrogen economy. And on a personal note, he hosts a very informative website called solarhydrogen.net, which compiles all of the hydrogen research in a really good setting. So I would highly recommend anyone who's interested in hydrogen-related topics, go visit that website. And today, he will be talking to us about the role of hydrogen towards 100% renewable energy. E.B., would you play Sandy's presentation? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sandy Thomas. I'm making a report today on solar hydrogen. Here's a block diagram of a solar hydrogen system. In this zero carbon system, all energy, excuse me, all energy comes from the sun through solar PV arrays that produce electricity. But some electricity goes to an electrolyzer, which splits water into oxygen and hydrogen. The hydrogen is compressed and stored at night and on cloudy days, excuse me. Some hydrogen goes through a stationary fuel cell system, which produces electricity for the grid. So the grid gets electricity day and night. Some hydrogen also goes for powering fuel cell electric vehicles. Now this chart shows the cash flow for a company that built such a solar hydrogen system in Palmdale, California. This system would cost about $6 million. So the red line shows the the costs of the system. $6 million the first year, and then averaging out to maybe $200,000 to $300,000 per year during actual operation. The blue line shows the revenue from selling electricity. Unfortunately, the revenue is much more than the costs annually. So the cumulative cash flow starts out negative and then reaches positive cash flow around 2023. And this system has a 30-year internal rate of return of about 25.7%, which is quite good. This chart compares the performance of the solar hydrogen energy system in Palmdale and New York. Again, if we look at the future data, this is the $6 million I mentioned on the previous slide. Internal rate of return is 25.7%. In Palmdale, you require a PV system with 4 megawatts of power. In New York, you need a bigger PV system because there's less sunlight. Almost to 5.9 megawatts. And the system would therefore cost more, about $8.3 million instead of 6. And the internal rate of return drops a little bit to 21%. But notice that most investors would be satisfied with a 10% rate of return, so 20% is really quite good, even for New York. Now, the goal of the solar hydrogen energy system is to meet the 2050 greenhouse gas reduction goal, which California set as a greenhouse gas emission rate, which is 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. And they estimate that if we could reach that level, we would eliminate the worst aspects of climate change. This chart just reminds you that there's two big elephants in the room when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions: electricity and transportation. Together, electricity and transportation account for over 70% of all greenhouse gas emissions. So obviously we need to significantly reduce electricity and transportation greenhouse gas emissions. Now, the current efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions are not sufficient. In other words, utilities are now adding renewable electricity to the grid, but without storage, and that's not sufficient, as I'll show in the next slide. For transportation, we're adding battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. they too would not be sufficient to meet our greenhouse gas reduction goal. So next I asked the question, suppose utilities really expand their solar energy capacity so that they put in enough PV solar panels to supply 100% of all electricity everywhere in the country at noon on a sunny day. What fraction of electricity could be provided by solar under those circumstances? And this chart answers that question. It turns out we looked at the 11 top electricity producing states in the country and found out the average PV capacity factor is 55%. So even with 100% solar capacity, we can supply about 55% of all electricity. But at night and on cloudy days, you need backup power to supply about 45% of all electricity. So the choices for backup are nuclear, other renewables, or fossil fuel power plants. Well, this chart shows what would happen if we put in 100% PV capacity and then we use the natural gas combined cycle as backup power, which is the lowest carbon content generator. But even with a natural gas combined cycle backup, it would generate 1,100 million metric tons per year of carbon emissions. If you add that to the 3,500 million metric tons from the non-electricity greenhouse gas emissions from these four sectors, the total is 4,600 million metric tons, which is 3.6 times greater than the goal that we mentioned earlier. If we add carbon capture and storage to the natural gas combined cycle plant, things improve slightly. I can go from 3.6 to being able to come within 2.9 times of the goal. It's still far above the goal, even when we have 100% solar capacity. So this says we really need storage of electricity, either hydrogen or batteries. And the next two slides show the costs comparing battery storage with hydrogen storage. For battery storage, the blue line here shows the cost of battery storage as a function of the number of days of electricity stored. With current batteries, with the prices around $200 per kilowatt hour. The red line shows what would happen if the battery companies could meet their goal of producing batteries for less than $100 per kilowatt hour. The two dashed lines at the bottom are both for PV hydrogen systems, the top line for current costs and the bottom line for future costs and efficiencies. And if we look at where the two blue lines cross for current technology, we find that crossover is about 2 days of storage. So if we want to store more than 2 days of electrical energy, the battery system will always cost more than the hydrogen system. Things get a little bit better with the future data, but the two curves cross right around 1 day. So if we have to store more than 1 day of electricity, the batteries will always cost more than the hydrogen system. And by the way, the PV hydrogen curves are totally flat here because these are the costs for a seasonal PV hydrogen system that stores for 365 days. So we're storing for the whole year. Now this chart shows the seasonal electricity storage cost, hydrogen versus batteries. Now nobody is suggesting that we use batteries for seasonal storage now because batteries are far too expensive. And this chart just shows how much more expensive they are. I've got data for current costs and future costs and efficiencies. So if we look at the current data here, I find that the battery system, PV battery, would cost almost 18 times more than a PV hydrogen system. Things get just a little bit better with the future cost and efficiency data, but the battery system would still cost 17.5 times more than the PV hydrogen system. For transportation, we really need to look at all electric vehicles, either battery powered or fuel cell powered. But battery electric vehicles have several negative consequences. They cost more than fuel cell electric vehicles, produce more greenhouse gas emissions, take longer to refuel, have shorter range, and it's much more difficult to power heavy-duty vehicles such as trucks, buses, and trains with batteries than with fuel cells. So my conclusions: current greenhouse gas reduction efforts are not sufficient to meet the goal. Even with 100% solar capacity and using natural gas combined cycle backup, which is the lowest carbon backup, the utilities would still generate 3.6 times more greenhouse gas emissions than the goal. So we must have storage, either hydrogen or batteries, but batteries cost 17 times more than hydrogen. The solar hydrogen energy system does enable us to reach our goal without any government mandates or expenditures required. And I haven't mentioned this, but with the solar hydrogen system, almost all vehicles would be powered by hydrogen from solar energy, oil imports. Thank you.
Hi, Sandy. First of all, hope you're feeling a little better now. Sounds like you were coughing a little bit in the beginning, but I think I love your presentation too, because it kind of really ties in together with the conversation that Richard and Larry were talking about in terms, and certainly I agree with, and I think everyone would agree that hydrogen is definitely the way to go for longer storage for more than 1 day or 2 days. As you've shown, batteries really can't store energy for more than that period of time. So, so in that regard, my question to you is, so hydrogen does seem to hold a lot of potential, but in your experience, what has been the biggest challenge so far in transitioning toward hydrogen economy?
I don't think we can hear you.
Sandy, I think we can't hear you, so I think we're just going to move into the for our next presenter, and we can try to sort this out, and if not, we come back to your question later on. Sorry about that. So for fourth speaker, we have Bronte Payne from Environment America. At Environment America, Bronte directs the solar energy program and their campaigns. Some of her previous successes include renewal of the federal tax credit and her efforts towards moving Boston University and Cornell University to 100% renewable energy. Today, she will be presenting on Environment America's 100% renewable energy campaign for all states. Evie, would you play Bronte's video? Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Bronte Payne and I'm the Go Solar Campaign Director with Environment America. I'm here to talk to you all about our campaign for 100% renewable energy and how we can't becomes we will. So we know that climate change is inconvenient. A wise man once said, it's uncomfortable, it's a frightening topic, not just because of the physical changes we can already see coming to our world, but also because of the tremendous challenge that climate change presents to us as individuals, our communities, in our nation, and in our world. we feel a cognitive dissonance, two things that we absolutely know can't both be true. So we have to stop this, but we can't stop this. We must stop using fossil fuels because global warming threatens our future, but we can't stop using fossil fuels because every one of us relies on them every second of our lives. So how do we power all of this without this? First, we need to transition to renewable energy, clean power from the sun and wind. It's a big, bold idea that we can shift our entire society from one that gets energy by using up natural resources and creating pollution to a society that collects and stores an endless supply of clean energy from the great outdoors. But it's not enough to have a great idea. We also need a way to make that idea into a reality. The insight I want to share with you all today is that living without fossil fuels may feel impossible, but we can make it possible. We need to live without fossil fuels, and to do that, we have to articulate a vision of what that life will look like and set a society-wide goal to achieve it. The obstacles aren't physical, they're challenges of imagination and of commitment. So why do I say that the obstacles aren't physical? Here are some quick facts. On this chart, you can see the annual electricity consumption of the United States on the left in the black dot. On the right, you can see different technologies that we can use to harvest renewable energy and the amount of electricity that we have the technical ability to get from them. So for example, the US has the ability to produce 100 times as much electricity from the sun as we use each year and 10 times as much electricity from the wind. Every single state in the country could produce more electricity from renewables than it uses each year. So from offshore wind power to rooftop solar panels, battery storage, utility solar farms, renewable technologies are getting better and cheaper at a rapid pace. So the challenge of getting rid of fossil fuels isn't that we can't do it physically. The challenge is building the collective will to move together onto a new course towards a better future. If we're going to change the world, we have to decide to do that together. The most powerful tool we have for building collective action is a goal. So why does setting a goal matter? Because by setting a goal, we create a space for the discoveries, innovations, and actions that make the impossible possible. Goal setting is a virtuous cycle. As goals are set and action begins, a goal is met and then another. So you see success, and that breeds confidence. Confidence leads to greater ambition, and step by step, the impossible becomes possible. So what does that mean in the fight against climate change? It means we need to envision the future that we want, set goals to get there, and then work to bring those goals to reality. The vision we find most compelling is 100% renewable energy. So let's take that enormous power of the sun and the wind and harness it, ramp up our battery storage, stop wasting energy, and break our addiction to fossil fuels. By setting a goal of getting off of fossil fuels entirely, we can clean up our air, clean up our water, remove the threats from mining and drilling, and eliminate most of the emissions that cause global warming. Activism for renewable energy dates back at least 5 decades, but since the 2000s, there's been a renewed uptick. Advocates around the country have gotten their states to commit to ever increasing amounts of renewable energy. And for the last 3 years, we've been working with college campuses, cities, and states to set their goals for 100% renewable energy. We'd never won a statewide commitment to this entirely new vision for the future until 2 years ago. In September 2018, California set the goal for 100% clean electricity by 2045. So the nation's largest state, the world's 5th largest economy, changed the course of its future with a visionary idea and a concrete goal to achieve it. Hawaii had already made the same decision, and Massachusetts was considering it, but California made the leap after 2 years of intense effort by the engaged public, by advocates and organizers, college students, and of course by legislators. And that's when we knew that this path held a lot of promise for the nation. 100% renewable energy is a great goal, not only because it's totally necessary, but because real people love it. It's a positive step we can take towards a cleaner future and away from a dystopian one. But some of you are probably still asking, what good is a goal? It's just a target. It's not any kind of promise or roadmap. Who's to say that renewables will rise to the occasion? Well, we had confidence about the power of goals for the same reason that California did, and that is history. So we'll take a look at one example of what happened in the past when people have set goals for renewable energy. During California's energy crisis in the early 2000s, Enron and other companies manipulated the energy market to drive up the price of electricity from natural gas. After months of intermittent blackouts, California was more than ready to revamp its electricity system. So the state set a goal of getting 20% of their electricity from new renewable sources, mostly wind and solar and geothermal, by 2017. Within a few years, it was clear that they were going to exceed that goal. So in 2006, they made the move to move up the goalpost to 2010, calling for the same 20% of California's power supply to be renewable by 2010. Pretty soon, they were on track to exceed that goal. So in 2011, they revised it again. But when it became clear that the goal was too low, they revised it again in 2015, bumping the goal to 50% by 2030. And again last year, increasing the goal to 60%. So how are we doing? In 2018, California got nearly 40% of its power from renewable sources, and that's not even including large hydropower dams. So why do goals work? So first, they create the certainty about the future demand for solar and wind. The goals signal to developers of wind and solar projects that they will be able to sell their electric power for years to come. That certainty helps them secure investments that they're going to need to meet the upfront costs of building solar and wind power facilities. And the utilities have big incentives to help them meet their goals, as they face penalties if they don't come through with enough clean power. So in the efforts of time, I'm only going to share this example, but there's many more if people are interested. So in the spring of 2018, they set out to create more momentum for renewable energy using goal setting. They passed legislation mandating that by 2020, all new homes built in the state will have solar panels, and they set a goal of putting backup battery storage into 1 million homes by 2026. And that brings us to September of 2018, when California set its latest and most ambitious goal, a commitment to 100% zero carbon electricity by 2045. Not getting rid of most fossil fuels produced by electricity, but all of it. So California's new law is a huge step in the right direction, but what does it mean in respect to climate change? Electricity is only one part of the picture when it comes to getting off of fossil fuels. But clean electricity opens the door to a cleaner future across all sectors of our economy. If electricity is emissions free, then we can electrify cars and trucks and buses. We can electrify heating and cooling of the buildings, and they can all be emissions free. So clean electricity is the step that makes other steps possible. So the groups that make up Environment America are committed to making this happen around the country. Here's where we stand so far. 30 states plus Washington, D.C. have already set mandatory renewable energy requirements, and 25 of those plus D.C. have increased their goals at least once after surpassing their targets. Now, 7 states are committed to 100% clean or renewable electricity by 2050 or sooner. So that's Hawaii, California, New Mexico, Washington State, Maine, and most recently Virginia. Success is begetting success from Maine to Texas to Nevada, and the pace is only picking up. This year, Environment America is supporting renewable energy legislation in 14 states and are making exciting progress in a lot of those. And just as states can act, so can cities. More than 150 cities across the country have committed to reaching 100% renewable energy. Environment America is also working to get colleges and universities to jump on the bandwagon too. So we're currently organizing on dozens of campuses across the country, and 37 campuses have made the commitment to date. So this is how we create change. When people start demanding and planning for a future of 100% renewable energy in our homes and workplaces and communities, it becomes possible to imagine an entire country in which fossil fuels are eased out. And the more organizations, frontline communities, and neighborhood groups in this movement, the faster we can create the change that we want and need to see. So that's how we power this with this.
Thank you, Bronte. That was an excellent presentation. Certainly really appreciate your and Environment America's and other organizations such as yours to push policymakers and others to 100% renewable energy. And I don't know if there's a better metaphor here, but analogy here, but someone has to be demanding renewable energy, 100% renewable energy before policymakers accept it or look into it. So certainly your organization role is very important in our 100% renewable energy transition. So the question for you is, as the states are moving towards 100% renewable energy goals, how important is it for policymakers to work with the electric utility, and what kind of commitment of policy should the policymakers should take from the electric utility such that the long-term goal of 100% renewable energy is fulfilled?
Yeah, I would say for states, it's definitely important to have a working relationship with your utility. And I think we saw in Larry's presentation, some utilities have committed to being zero carbon, which is exciting to see them take steps in the right direction. California, for example, put in place a policy that requires that the utility be able to meet a demand of a certain amount of clean energy. So I'd say for states, you're able to put policies in place that tell utilities where they have to go. For cities and for college campuses, it is really important that they are able to work closely with their utilities and get their utilities to share the vision of their goals, because they don't have the luxury of telling utilities how much renewable energy they need to produce, and instead need to be able to buy in the utilities to work with them to make sure that they can get the type of renewable energy that they need to meet the goals that they set.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we're going to move on to our fifth speaker, who is Paul Fenn. Paul Fenn is one of the national leaders when it comes to community choice aggregation, or CCAs. Paul was one of the first ones to push for CCAs in Massachusetts and then successfully deploy CCAs in California. Right now, CCA model serves more than 10 million customers in California and 30 million customers in the US overall. Paul currently leads the research and development firm called localpower.com. So Paul today will be discussing the next phase for CCAs, what he dubs as CCAs 3.0. Margaret, would you play Paul's video, please? Thank you.
Hello, greetings. I'm Paul Fenn from Local Power, Massachusetts. We work on CCA, Community Choice Aggregation. I want to talk to you about our local Green New Deal program, also referred to as the CCA 3.0 model. So we created CCA back in the early 1990s in the Massachusetts Senate. This is the original bill. The idea was buy greener power as a community at a discount. It was a kind of early concept of climate action based on buying power. And the structure is really held throughout the years on, where CCAs can form under a one-year launch process. It's a democratic process through an adoption of an ordinance to choose a new supplier as opposed to individual consumers. So it uses an opt-out mechanism, so consumers not wanting to participate can opt out without a charge, but otherwise are included. So they tend to get 90% of consumers in the jurisdiction to participate. The communities get to define their energy mission, goals, and program structure. They send a plan to the state regulators for certification, so everyone's on the same page. And they have special access to detailed customer energy usage data, which is a critical part of siting solar in a cost-effective way. Finally, CCA is a basis for investment based on green bonds in local renewables or distributed energy resources, DER, a term that I will use quite a bit in this presentation. Others behind the meter energy efficiency and renewable energy technologies. CCAs have been very successful at fixing deregulated markets. They are widely recognized as successfully organizing competition more efficiently and driving innovation and discounts for customers in a way that deregulation never could and regulation couldn't either. They're very popular and they've grown across the country. To the point today where they cover, the laws authorizing CCA cover half the United States energy market. These are some of the larger energy consuming states here. In green, the yellow ones have legislation pending. So soon will be 60–70% of the United States in terms of eligibility. Massachusetts was the first state. This is a map, a recent map showing CCAs there. Over half the state is under CCA. Ohio also over half. Illinois over half. And New York just emerging today, but with many different CCAs forming and some already under operation. We, up into the 90s, followed that de minimis model of buying green power and realized there were some limitations to that approach. So we developed CCA 2.0 around to the year 2000. And this idea was not to just buy green power from the grid, but to build greener local power at rate parity while maintaining rate parity. So we developed the green bond at that time as a way to finance local renewables and sort of made that as part of the model of driving investment. And so today you've got 3.6 gigawatts invested by some 18 CCAs in California with 10 million customers in them, about 35% of the market. It will more than double in the next 2 years to 85% of the market. So it's going to be driving many more gigawatts, billions of dollars of local investment, focused locally and regionally, a major opportunity for renewables in the state. And it's really driving the CCA popularity because those California CCAs constitute 67 of 72 U.S. cities that have 100% renewable energy today. And we have virtually created, that's the yellow dots. Blues are aspirational, yellows are actual, and you see where they are. They're in California. Those are all CCA 2.0 programs. So nevertheless, we've had this great success and it's driving popularity, but we've really, through our experience, have learned that even 100% renewable energy isn't really good enough for climate purposes. For climate mobilization, you need physical carbon reduction, not just legally 100% renewable, which can mean many things and have many different carbon signatures. And in particular, the limiting factor of solar or renewable energy as a carbon reduction pathway, is these old policies, 25 years old, designed for early market development, not for energy transformation. Those are net energy metering, feed-in tariffs, and renewable energy certificates. We've got to get beyond these structures. They are the limiting factor now, not the technology, not the cost. So what we're talking about is transforming, according to the United Nations criterion of energy transformation in the next 10 years, 2030, a transformation not just to plug power, not just a legal renewable status for serving plug power, but physical renewable status, an ending of the physical need for combustion of fossil fuels for plug power, heating and hot water, and transportation. That is more than 3 times the carbon reduction just for the sectors, plus the physical dimension, which quadruples or more how much carbon we're going to reduce. So the first problem is grid renewables. Grid renewables require gas-fired generators. That's because of their intermittency. Transmission systems, and particularly new transmission systems built in the name of renewables, have debt service requirements that inevitably backfill renewable generators with gas-fired generators. And third, those who sell renewable generation and have resource adequacy requirements to sell into markets have to backfill to match intermittency in their supply. So centralized grid renewables present an insurmountable problem, and distributed energy resources, DERs, really represent the solution. That we've got to go local, and we've got to focus on appliance controls, HVAC and hot water systems, electric vehicles, and hydrogen generators that are integrated with those resources. DERs are it. DERs are the carbon pathway, not renewables, distributed renewables. And so we're talking about getting over these carbon associated with really old models. We need to focus on net metering, because net metering causes its own carbon in a very significant way that few recognize, and which really undermines the ability even of distributed renewables to deliver it. Namely, that when you have power flowing in and out from a building with solar on it, net metering, feed-in tariffs, that fluctuation in load causes carbon, causes it in important ways. First of all, it results in unchanged system level requirements for imported system mix power. This is so critical, and many of you don't understand this. You've got to have the same power plants on spinning reserves when you bring power in to serve those buildings, even though you have solar panels on the roof. And then you've got congestion from the export into the grid, which results in these 5% net metering caps, 10% caps, and everyone's fighting around the caps. But the caps are there for a reason. You're causing costs for importing and exporting. We need to stop importing and exporting. That's where microgrids come in. That's where flexible storage comes in, whether it's HVAC and hot water, flexible heat storage, whether it's appliance automation, controlling your load in relation to real time, whether it is electric vehicles, storing into flexible storage in vehicles. These are pathways to reduce system power, gas oil, gasoline, and without any exports. So that's your pathway. To create a pathway, we've got to switch from thinking about markets and transactions, which is how it's all done today, tariffs, incentives, demand response. This is transactions and markets. We have to switch to serving communities as physical organisms and reducing the grid level and pipeline level dependencies of those communities. It's a very different way of looking at it, which we're taking. So 3.0 personifies that concept, and the paradigm is climate mobilization, not just greening, not 100% renewable. We got to reduce carbon. And so the center of this is a microgrid, a building where the customer lives. We're looking to use a microgrid as a load avoiding structure, not an export structure, with heat and transportation energy requirements served by them, using the CCA below on the right there, using a municipal loan account to process the investment, voluntary investment by the customer, using cooperatives for customer sharing, and shares systems for sharing citywide, and finally control systems on the microgrids to facilitate the subtraction of load from the grid, not just adding of renewables or exporting of renewable capacity. Interoperability of multiple systems, from batteries, stationary batteries, to electric vehicles, to automation of appliances that are connected to photovoltaic systems and other renewables, islanding on those microgrids, and the integration of heating systems, HVAC, hot water, as flexible storage. We're displacing not just traditional plug load electricity with photovoltaics, but displacing natural gas, heating oil, and diesel. So it's a switch really from a different value proposition of let's give you a discount, would be legally green, that's 1.0, and generally how power is marketed today with renewable energy certificates, to 2.0, which was really saying let's build regionally and locally, and but otherwise still has a passive customer involved, not an active customer, to a 3.0 model which uses an active customer, builds locally, but through a different technology pathway in which the customer invests, receives his or her own return on investment on those facilities, and therefore introduces a new criterion of action, a new value proposition to the customer. It's a critical dimension of engaging people in widespread investment and decarbonization. And so we're talking about providing revenue stream for green bond investment. And under this structure, as you can see, customer pays a voluntary premium the way they would for 100% renewable or for a solar panel on the roof if they're a homeowner. In this case, any customer, whether they own a roof or not, whether they're a renter, whether they're rich or poor, or have a credit line or don't, is paying on their bill a premium invested in a facility in their building, on their block, in their neighborhood, and is receiving through the community's bill credits. This results in a transition of the whole combined aggregate community's low duration curve. That's the system grid dependency or demand levels. And this is every slice is 1 day, and those are 8,760 slices, and that's 1 year out of hours. And what you get is a transformed structure. So this is cutting out those hours of load on the system, and that decarbonizes the system radically in the way the UN is asking for. It also involves different counterparties. You're not buying from the same entities. Earlier, CCAs bought from, used brokers to buy from retail energy suppliers who are traders who buy and sell power from generators, or they went straight to the generators and bought it from the generators. And then they use renewable energy certificate traders for the green component. In 2.0, they switched to grid renewables and retailers or wholesalers. But now we're talking about many more categories of technologies and developers, more local, more locally based. Smaller companies are going to be providing these goods and services. It's critical to see that 3.0 introduces a different business model in terms of counterparties, but also in terms of the development process, because now it starts with data, not just with marketing products, but CCA can get this very detailed data, can figure out what makes sense for each customer based on multiple characteristics in their buildings, their energy usage, and so on, to then provide information to municipalities which can approach the customer with the already defined opportunity, who can then go out and solicit bids from installers pre-qualified by the CCA, and that then could start the process of developing this, of getting the funding for the site and developing this site. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Paul. That was very insightful presentation. I admit I knew a little bit of CCAs, but I did not know so many people were a part of CCAs in the US. So my question is, so if I live in Florida now and I used to live in North Carolina, so if I don't have, does CCA have to be enabled by the statute? So if I live in a jurisdiction where there is no CCA enabling statutes, can I form my own CCA? Paul, I think you're on mute again. So same as Sandy, can you unmute yourself?
So you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Today, half the country has CCA laws, right? And so that's half. And as I showed on that map, about 2/3 will be under CCAs in the next couple of years, very likely. So in some ways, it's not really a problem. I mean, you're in North Carolina, okay, you have Duke Energy, so maybe that's hard, you know. The issue with any of these pathways you heard about today, particularly Richard Perez pathway, but then also technology pathways, is always who's going to do it, right? There's the business model numbers and returns on investment on wind power and even solar power have really been quite persuasive for quite a few years now. Energy efficiency, financed energy efficiency has been competitive with gas-fired power for many years, for substation level energy procurement for many years. So just having a positive balance sheet and a business model doesn't get you action. So action depends in part on, as Richard Perez mentioned, on can you line up your ducks? Do you have policy and regulatory structure to make this happen? And you have, as I said, CCA half the country, 2/3 very soon. You also have public power states like Nebraska, where you have public entities that have a reason to act on climate, right? If we frame this around climate change as an event, then the real issue is who's ready to implement, who's ready to demonstrate leadership, as opposed to, you know, top-down SimCity model where you're thinking in the abstract, how should it be done based on the optimal economics. So CCA as a strategy requires a disruption of the industry. It is not, you know, depending on AT&T to build the internet in 1977. It's depending on market disruption and electric industry restructuring to create openings for innovators, motivated innovators like municipalities, who are the world's carbon leader today by far, and have really achieved all other categories of government or corporations. Give them the opportunity to perform on this pathway. And so I would say to Richard Perez's model, which interests me very much, that you can plug in the idea, instead of assuming you have to work through the distribution utility, which itself is the barrier and has been for many years to this kind of energy transformation. You could give that same role to a municipality, and that's what CCA is, right? So these CCAs are scheduling their own load with the independent system operators, procuring their own energy from wholesale and or retail suppliers themselves, and they control full access to every meter history within their service territory. They have full knowledge of energy usage.
Well, we might have to move in, but
okay. Final point is just that they control both sides of the meter. So on Richard's point, they are better poised to play that role than distribution utilities, which are exempt outside behind the meter. Anyway, so just that.
Thanks, Paul. So in interest of time, we have two more presentations, and the sixth presenter we have is Seth Kirshenberg. And Seth has previously worked on more than 15 billion value of 15 billion private-public transactions in clean energy. As a partner at his firm, Kutak Rock LLP, he counsels clients on energy efficiency, smart grid, new battery technologies, and various other clean energy technologies. Today, he will be discussing about the role of federal energy, the role of federal government in solar industry. Margaret, would you please play Seth's presentation, please? Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Seth Kirshenberg. I'm a partner with the law firm of Kutak Rock. I'm here to go over and discuss with you some of the lessons learned to implement renewable energy programs throughout the country, and some of the lessons learned and how they can be used for other programs to develop energy and renewable energy projects throughout. Now, one of the things that I always like to talk about is at the beginning of the Obama administration, I was working on several of the transition teams at the Department of Energy. The focus, I was fascinated because the focus was, how do we promote renewable energy development by federal agencies to promote the purchasing of renewable energy? And it was fascinating because, you know, are the largest purchaser of power in the United States. It's something that policymakers have known for a long time. And within that, the Department of Defense is the largest government purchaser of power. Now, the Energy Policy Act of 2005 had already started the focus on commercial use of renewable energy, and there was somewhat of a focus on federal agencies, and they're looking at resilience at their military bases and renewable energy development at NREL and some other places that were focused on renewable energy and where renewable energy made sense. But the Obama administration really wanted to focus on federal agencies to promote through purchasing renewable energy development. And so we looked at, for the U.S. Department of Energy, how much did renewable incentives cost the government? What benefits did they bring? And how can similar incentives be applied? Now, in 2006, we started the focus, and there was energy savings programs. There was a lot of renewable energy just starting. But 2009 kicked off large federal purchases and the focus on that. And our team, when we're looking at the lessons learned from 2009, most of us had lived it and worked through it, but we wanted to focus on what was the government's spending and what were the benefits, megawatts installed, kilowatt hours delivered, jobs, etc. And the analysis focused on the period really from 2005 to 2015. Now, the types of renewable incentives, everyone knows this who's participating in this, but there are credit incentives and tax incentives that were two of major drivers for renewable energy development. It pushed and made renewable energy development affordable, both on the private purchases and the federal purchases. People don't realize how much production tax credits and investment tax credits, and really state credits as well. R&D incentives were very important because they really got the national labs involved in developing better and more efficient solar panels, better and more efficient turbines that really helped the projects as they move forward. And then demand mandates, especially the state, were really critical. And as I said, we really focus on the federal government mandates. And as I said before, the Department of Defense, as the nation's largest energy user, each service had renewable energy. And now I like to focus on the goals. I really like to focus on the Navy 1 gigawatt, because that really focused a lot of federal and Navy bases and Marine Corps bases on developing renewable energy. The same with Army bases and the same with Air Force bases. They all have very large programs on renewable energy that focus on both wind and solar. Now, what's really interesting is we really focus a lot on federal agency purchasing, but one of the big problems in the beginning was that federal agencies really only had 10-year authority to purchase power. And that makes these projects very expensive, especially in the beginning when we were looking in 2009. Now, the 10 U.S.C. 2922A, although it was enacted, wasn't really used. And eventually it started to become used. It's only a Department of Defense authority, but allows up to 30-year purchasing. And once again, Department of Defense, the largest energy purchaser, once it could start using 30-year authority, it started having 22, 25 years, 27-year agreements that allowed for the financing and allowed the lower costs for private developers to install these solar projects on Department of Defense land that allows Department of Defense to purchase this renewable energy. And it allowed really the Navy to reach its 1 gigawatt because it was able to purchase the power through long-term power purchase agreements. 2667 leases allowed parties to develop large solar projects on military bases, and then that power was sold to the grid. And then you have the energy savings performance contracts, utility energy service contracts, and utility privatization, which are projects that are used now significantly to purchase power and to do upgrades to energy projects, at military bases and at the civilian agencies. Now, the executive orders that were implemented over the period during the Obama administration really focused on, allowing agencies to increase federal agency use, focus on renewable energy purchases, and those types of things really helped move the agencies forward and gave the agencies a focus on renewable. Now, what we found was There were about $51.2 billion in incentives. Most of this tax incentives, as you see from the chart that we created. There were credit incentives, R&D grants, but the investments in the renewables was further supported by government purchasing mandates enacted at the federal and state level, and especially one of the things when we looked at this as part of our report for the Department of Energy, we looked at the installed capacity for solar energy and wind grew 9 times between 2005 and 2015. Annual generation for solar and wind grew 10 times in that period. And the available incentives really helped drive market penetration by both of those period of time. The other thing that we focused on was the purchasing mandates. And you see that purchasing went from 5.37% in 2010 all the way to 2016. It was 12.43% was the amount of electricity that was being generated by renewable energy projects. And that has increased over the last 3.5, 4 years as well to increase significantly. So it's something that we believe has worked. We think that it's going to work really going forward. And you really saw in 2016 a huge spike from where it was before, from that 8.3% as these federal projects started to come. The other thing is state renewable energy purchasing mandates. Those really helped a lot of these projects get built. They were significant incentives. And one of the things that we like to focus on is where are we now? And 10 states recently increased their targets. There are 2 or 3 that I wanted to focus on. Really, California, 60% by 2030, one of the largest energy users in the country. The District of Columbia, one of the smallest, but it's where I live, 100% by 2032, with 10% solar by 2041. Really a large increase. And as different events have occurred, we've really started to all focus on resilience being important, local energy generation being important to assist the grid as we're moving forward. Base power still needed, obviously, but these types of focuses really should help. One of the other things that really we saw over this period of time was huge decreases in cost, and those costs have obviously decreased over the last 5 years as well. And we've really seen that really help these things become a lot more affordable. So with the minute I have left, I really want to focus on successes and lessons learned, and really how we use this information as we move forward. So if we're going to focus on renewable energy development, we have to understand the cost, but we also have to understand the job creation that occurred over the period of time and the jobs that are still there in the renewable energy and wind energy, including wind and solar energy fields. $51.2 billion is a fair amount of money, but the incentives have created a whole industry as we move forward. The other thing is it's also helped decrease the cost significantly as we move forward. The impact in price is drastic. As I showed you in those other charts, we've really seen a huge decrease over the last 10 to 15 years in both solar and wind, and really, frankly, in and other energy sources as well. And the other thing that we really learned, and this was really the focus of the report for the Department of Energy, was really how other energy sources can utilize this example to have incentives and federal agency purchasing to help promote energy development that promotes energy security and energy resilience in the United States. So once again, thank you very much. My name is Seth Kirshenberg. I'm with the law firm of Achyut Shrestha, and we really enjoy working on these projects, and thank you for inviting us to speak and participate in this program.
Seth, thank you so much. Very eye-opening in terms of what's going on in the federal government. One thing that I noticed was that a lot of the programs that you talked about are rollover from previous administrations. So with your current work, have you seen what is your experience working with the current administration? Has those previous mandates been canceled, or are they new programs that have been rolled over in this administration?
Yeah, I mean, we're still seeing purchasing. It's just on renewable energy. The focus has been a lot on energy resilience and energy efficiency and energy development at military bases and at civilian agency facilities. A lot of time, the energy that's being purchased because of the lower cost that's available makes sense. And what the federal agencies have learned, especially military bases, it's critical to have power that can power a particular base in a facility existing. So at a lot of the military bases, you're seeing the need and the interest in renewable energy, a lot of battery power development. And in California, there's a lot of tie-in as well with PG&E and others for battery development behind the fence at military bases that are then being used not only on the military base, but also as baseload power for development for the rest of the California market. And it's an interesting model that I think you're going to see continually expanded.
Thank you, Seth. I have a lot of questions, but I got, for time's sake, I'm going to move on. And for our final speaker, we have our very own Robert Forster. Rob is the chairperson of ACES and has been working in renewable energy in national and international role for more than 40 years. He's worked with USAID, World Bank, EPA, pretty much every renewable INGO out there. So without further, let's look at his presentation on his work and going on in Bangladesh. EB, please. Thank you.
Hi, this is Robert Foster. I will be talking about the solar PV pumping for ag irrigation project funded by the Asian Development Bank. I'd like to recognize my colleagues Sakil Saeed with the Bangladesh Rural Electrification Board and Mushfiq Rahman with SODEV. This project, we're interested in promoting solar irrigation pumps, basically to displace diesel pumps. There's about 1.4 million diesel pumps in Bangladesh and about 350,000 grid-connected pumps. This gives you an idea of that allocation of pumps within the country. There have been projects using solar water pumping in Bangladesh, but this will be the biggest one funded by the Asian Development Bank. This project comes out of the Power System Efficiency Improvement Project, and it's over a $20 million project to do 2,000 solar irrigation pumps, large pumps, in the next couple years. Traditional diesel pumps are used, which are very polluting pumps. They're expensive to operate, and so we can do better with these pumps. The electric pumps, not so many, 350,000. They have a subsidized tariff at about 4.7 American cents a kilowatt hour. The national policies in Bangladesh, there is a renewable energy policy promoting the use of renewables. There's net metering under development in Bangladesh. There's a draft guide for grid integration. Solar's exempt from the 15% value added tax. The government also subsidizes diesel fuel at about 30%, and it subsidizes electricity tariff for irrigation. So this makes it more challenging for the solar. This is a map of the solar PV generation potential in Bangladesh, which is pretty good, typical for a country in the tropics. This is what a solar water pumping system looks like. We've got a PV array, well with the pump, typically water storage, some kind of controller, inverter. Most of the pumps that we're considering are submersible pumps, which are pretty reliable, have a long life. If you pick an AC pump, it can last many years. decades even. This just gives you an idea of some of the advantages and disadvantages of different types of pumps. Again, we'll probably be using mostly submersible pumps in this project. We've gone out and assessed existing solar water pumping systems in Bangladesh to see the state of the art. This is an example that the Korean International Cooperation Agency did in 2012 with BREB. They did about 40 projects, typically about 5 kilowatt arrays, 3.7 kilowatt pumps. After 7 years, about half of these systems were no longer functioning, mostly due to inverter failures and a few cases of theft. Generally, the pumps weren't sized quite big enough to meet the farmer irrigation needs. Here are some other examples from EDCOL pumps done in Bangladesh for farmer irrigation, mostly rice. Here's another example of a AVA solar water pumping project in Dinajpur, 11 kilowatts. This system had a failure because of AC circuit breakers using a DC source. Here's another example, solar gown installed. You can see the rice paddies literally coming up to the array. So we've noticed several different technical issues with these pump installations. Often the water pumps were undersized. And in a few cases, you might get voltage crash on a hot day as the voltage from the array drops and below what's required to run the inverter. Other issues we came across, shading issues. Sometimes vegetation grew up shaded the array. You don't want that. Wiring. Sometimes you're using indoor wire outdoors. Sometimes you're just literally throwing it on the ground. You can see a lot of dangling wires here. So that's a fire hazard, electrocution hazard, particularly in these rice paddies where there's water everywhere. Frequently, systems were not bonded and grounded, so that's another hazard. Also, there's lightning storms in these areas, so if they get hit by lightning and there's no path, that's a problem. Many systems had insufficient overcurrent protection. No string fuses, no surge protection devices, so this is a problem. Many of the variable frequency drive inverters were not really intended for water pumping. There's no maximum power point tracking on many of these, so this tends to cause the PV array to be greatly oversized to keep the system operational. Often AEC circuit breakers are used in DC circuits, which can cause issues. So here's some examples of some better systems installed by BMDA. Here, they're using a max power point tracking inverter. They're using a prepaid meter up here and running an AC pump. Here's another example for BMDA installation. Well done. You can see good workmanship here. They've got string fuses, circuit breakers, and the AC lines. Here's another example in Rajshahi of a BMDA project. So they originally installed 10 pilot systems in 2016, and now they have over 107 systems installed. Generally, systems were installed for about $1.38 per peak watt. So BMDA owns the pumps and sells the water to the farmers at about $2 an hour for the pumped water. So we have different business models used in Bangladesh. BREB wants to offer a 10-year loan to farmers for solar water pumping system. Eidcol, another one of the companies that has installed systems, 8-year loans. Here's an idea of the grid-tied energy generation from a grid-tied PV system in Dinajpur. Roughly we could get about 13,000 kilowatt hours a year. At the subsidized electric rate of 4.7 cents a kilowatt hour, that would be about $615. The advantage of going grid-tied is since the irrigation season is only 6 months a year, they can use the solar water pump array all year round to generate power and sell it back to the grid. Also helps improve the power quality at the end of the grid. So we're looking at, in this ADB project, put it in grid-tied solar water pumps as part of the project. 94% of the country has electricity already. We have public awareness programs, a Facebook page you can go visit, as you see here. We have had many farmer meetings. We have brochures for the farmers on solar water pumping, the costs, what's involved to try and interest them, newspaper ads. Here's a Facebook page. We've had some issues with gender implementation since most of the farms are owned by men, so only had about 3% women. So we're looking at sizing pumps in the 2 to 11 kilowatt range. The PV arrays will have to be bigger by about 1.6. And we were trying to do it better with grounding, proper overcurrent protection, cyclone-proof mounts, appropriate rated cables, etc. So all in all, the solar water pumping system costs have dropped by over 2/3 over the past 20 years. We're seeing over 150,000 systems a year. We're going to see a lot more. It's going to get up to the millions of systems per year by the end of this decade. Okay, so that's just a quick overview, and we'll take questions later. Thank you.
Hi, Rob. So unfortunately, we're already 10 minutes over the presentation, the schedule today, and we all need to be on a different session, and I'm monitoring this next session too. So would it be okay if we just end the presentation, this session here, and we all can meet with people who have questions, they can meet with you in the chat?
Sure, no problems.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And Sandy, sorry about your question too, but let's meet at this next session, which is where we're going to be discussing local policy. So we'll meet you at the next session shortly. Thank you.